Hello guys, Charles here and welcome back to my channel. Just before we dive in, I've got an ear infection, so I'm aware that I'm kind of slurring my speech a little bit today and mumbling, so sorry about that, but I can't really hear myself. So hopefully you can still enjoy this video in spite of me talking like I'm drunk or something like that. I assure you it's 10 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday here and nothing but coffee's been consumed. Cheers. Now, as I've talked about several times on this channel before, I have an awful lot of traditional academic qualifications. Now, the point of me telling you this is not to brag at all. In fact, it's almost the opposite. Although I went through that system and I certainly learned a lot of beneficial stuff, I certainly don't want to knock that. I couldn't play, you know, to put it bluntly, I couldn't play. And a lot of the reasons for that were I was over-analysing things which are not supposed to be analysed. They're supposed to be learned by doing. And there's so many things I now know after changing my course for the last 10 years or so, changing my path and really refocusing, that I could have been doing these things when I was 12 years old. They're not hugely difficult. They don't require this vast amount of theory, which I used to think, oh, I just need more and more theory, more and more theory. And so there's three things in particular to do with harmony that I want to share with you today, which even if you've got a relatively low standard of music theory, you should be able to at least start dipping your toe into these things. And these are things which are going to stop you needing to reach for a dictionary, a chord dictionary every single time you want a new chord. And they're things which are going to allow you to explore harmony yourself, come up with these ideas by yourself. When you hear them with your favourite players, you're going to be inspired and learn how to create those sounds pretty much by yourself. Now, just before I dive into the first of these are not application. For application of harmony, there's two ways you learn that. One is theory can be very beneficial, understanding harmony, functional harmony in particular. There's a bit of theory we need to learn there. But secondly, and most importantly, the way that the legends learned it is just by exposure. Throwing yourself in at the deep end, learning loads of tunes, listening to loads of music, and trying things out, you know, trying a weird chord that you can't think of where to fit it, trying to fit it anywhere until you find somewhere that you like. That's application. But we're just talking about actually creating these voicings in the first place today. So the first of these is something which seems so obvious in hindsight, but it never clicked for me until I had the combination of two sources. The first source was the Allan Holdsworth video where Allan talks about members of a family representing a scale. And the second source for me where this really gelled and clicked was Tim Miller and Mick Goodrick's GMC book. And what I realised from both of these, both the video and the book, is that chords and scales are the same thing. We study in the traditional system chords, scales, rhythm as three separate topics. But the more you learn about these, the more you realise they are just one topic. Even rhythm is very, very closely related to harmony and melody. So what I got from the GMC and the Allan Holdsworth video is this idea that once you've chosen a scale, you can play any notes of that scale to represent any chord from within that scale. So for example, if I want to represent a D minor chord, I can play a D minor triad because that's in, let's say D minor 6. So we'll talk Dorian. So I've got D minor. I could also play E minor. Now remember, the bassist's going to be playing D still. Working out nice to get a D. There we are. So that's a type of D minor 6 chord. I could drop the G on the top back down to an F. Another type of D minor chord. I'm just using notes from the scale. What else lives in that scale? Well, we've got B half diminished in the Dorian scale, which is another D6. I could drop the D down to a C. Get that sound. So all of this is just me saying, I've chosen D Dorian and I can choose any notes from within that scale to represent a D minor chord. Some will be more effective than others, as with all of these things. These are things to experiment with, and you find lovely voicings just living within a scale. Now, the only difference between the GMC approach and the way that Holdsworth talks about it, the only real difference, is GMC is ignore the root of the scale. So you've only got 6 notes left to deal with, therefore you can always split them into 2 triads. The reason they talk about that again is because the bassist will always be playing the root, or the root will be implied by the harmony. We can get a kind of phantom root, but we're not under any obligation to play the root ourselves. So that leads us nicely into the second harmony concept, which I wish I had known. And that is, as we just talked about, scales and chords, there is no difference. Therefore, chord scales are the same as scales and the same as chords. So a really, really great way to take someone else's material, or take a cool sounding chord you've come up with yourself, and run it through a chord scale. So for example, one of my favourite chords is a major 7 sharp 5. I just think it's so cool and it's so underused. So I could go for a C major 7 sharp 5 here. That's a really, really lovely sound. All I need to do is decide which scale I want that to have come from. So this one does require that tiny bit of theory where you do need to know your scales quite well. But for example, if I know my scales well, I could say, well, that's C major 7 sharp 5. I've got C, G sharp, B and E. Do I know any scales that have a C, G sharp, B and E? And I do. I know the A harmonic minor scale. A, B, C, D, E, F, G sharp, A. So what I can do from this point is move that through the chord scale to see if I get any more interesting sounds. So C major 7 sharp 5, I'm on the 3rd degree of an A harmonic minor scale. So I can now go up to a D and move every note once through the scale, and that just gives me, in this instance, D minor. D minor 7. Up once more through the notes only of A harmonic minor. So D becomes E, A becomes B, C becomes D, F becomes G sharp. So just an E7. So you see, using that chord, I've found one nice voicing, but the others were a bit plain. But what if I choose a different scale? What if I say, well, that C major 7 sharp 5, let's say that comes from the Messiaen mode 3. And I'm going to move each one of those notes through the Messiaen mode 3, one note. So let's say I'm in C Messiaen mode 3, so C is going to go up a tone to D, G sharp's going to go up a tone to B flat, B is going to go up a semitone to C, and E is going to go up a tone to F sharp. So I've now got a D7 augmented, D7 sharp 5. So I've got this. Now from there I can carry on through my chord scales. So I end up with this for my chord scale. And because of what we talked about in step 1, I can use any one of those voicings in any one of those positions to represent that C major 7 sharp 5. Now that was a really simple example, but the second part of this is what I call chord rotations. So chord rotations are basically just inversions, but the difference between an inversion and a chord rotation is that an inversion is only interested in the bass note changing. So you could literally just change your left hand on a piano but keep the right hand the same, and that's an inversion. In a rotation, every note moves by the same number of notes through that voicing. So I can take this C major 7 sharp 5 and I can rotate it once. So C is going to go to E, G sharp's going to go to B, B is going to go to C, E is going to go to G sharp. I've got this. So I've gone from this to this. I can rotate it again. So E is going to go to G sharp up there. B is going to go to C. C is going to go to E, and G sharp is going to go to B. I've got this. So my final rotation is going to take me from G sharp up to B, from C up to E, from E up to G sharp, and from B up to C. It's going to give me that. So now that I've got a few different voicings from just that C major 7 sharp 5 that I started with, got ones like this. I'm going to now try running that through my minor scale, because the results we got before were a bit boring. So I'm going to now say, well, look, A harmonic minor. I'm going to start on this voicing here, which is G sharp, C, E, and B. I don't even need to know what it's called, okay? Obviously, we know it's just a C major 7 sharp 5, but let's say we didn't. Well, let's say we didn't have the theory to understand that. We're just going to move every note once through the scale. So I'm going to get this. Now, many of you watching probably know those sounds already. They're really just familiar inversions to us. But again, I didn't know those sounds despite having all the theoretical understanding. So it's really important that you explore moving things through chord scales. And you occasionally stumble across some really interesting voicings that you wouldn't have found otherwise. And the third and final approach is so basic, it offends me that I didn't clock onto this by myself, really. All this is polychords, and more specifically polytriads. So all we need to do here is, there's only 4 types of triad: major, minor, diminished and augmented. Well, we need to see what it sounds like when we play a C major chord on top of a C major chord. Now obviously we know that's going to be the same, but I'm just saying that for consistency. And then a C minor on top of a C major chord. And then a C diminished on top of a C major chord. And then a C augmented on top of a C major chord. Then of course a C sharp major on top of a C major chord, a C sharp minor on top of a C major chord, C sharp diminished, C major, C augmented on top of a C major triad. Now, we'd go through the whole scale like that. That would give us every single triadic polychord combination. And there are some incredible colours in there. Now, some of you might have cottoned on to the problem here already, which is that, well, 2 triads often gives us 6 notes, and you would, of course, be 100% right. And the problem with 6 notes on the guitar is we've only got 6 strings, and to use them all with very specific notes is quite challenging. So I'd suggest you first experiment with this on the piano, where it's really easy. You can just fit the triads under your fingers and come up with a whole list of interesting polytriads or polychords that you think sound really, really good. Now, on top of that, the technical issues on the guitar are not as much of a concern as they appear. They sometimes are, but remember that a lot of these triads are going to have notes in common, which means we're now just down to 5 or 4 chords. So here's an example. If I play E minor on top of C major, well, they've both got an E and a G in them, so I've really only got C, E, G and B, which is a C major 7 chord. So a lot of the time we can cancel notes out and reduce them. Add to that the fact that we can kind of take a GMC approach and think, well, someone else is probably going to be playing the root of C, the bassist, so we could ignore the root if need be. And then if we're really familiar with the sounds of these, because we've tried them on the piano, you might decide, well, that note there is probably the best candidate to get rid of because it's the least juicy sounding within this particular polytriad pair that I've practiced on the piano. So here's an example of that. Let's say I wanted E flat major over C major. Well, there's a C major at the bottom. So E flat, G and B flat. Well, I've already got G in my C triad, so I only need 1 G in my chord. I've then got an E flat. Sounded pretty good already. And then I need a B flat. Well, I've got 2 options. I could keep the G on the open string and stretch up here. Sounds great though. Basically our Hendrix chord, this one. Or I could change the octave of the G, have it at the top string here. So I've got C, E, G, B flat. Then I need to get E flat somehow, so I could do some sort of bar. Or I could just decide, you know what, the G is too tricky to fit in and is possibly the least useful note. So I could just get rid of the G and I end up with my Hendrix chord, which still sounds really dirty. It's still got the thing that sounds good, the whole thing on the piano. So you see, we can get rid of notes just by what's technically difficult and what really is creating the beauty of those 2 triads clashing. It's not all 6 notes. There's something special happening within it. But by experimenting with every single combination of those 4 triads over every single combination of roots, then you end up with some really, really beautiful sounds. Then, of course, you need to change the bottom triad to a minor, go through the whole process again. Bottom triad to a diminished, go through the whole process again. Bottom triad to an augmented, and try the whole process again, and you will end up with unlimited amount of voicings. You can then move them through chord scales, rotate them. You know, the world is your oyster. You have so many chords. Your problem as a guitarist then won't be that you don't know enough chords, so let's put it that way. So I hope you found something useful there. Like I say, I'm sorry I'm not really 100%. I'm mumbling here. I can only hear my own voice reverberating in my head, which is very frustrating. However, hopefully there was something useful there. So just to round up, there's no difference between chords and scales. You can use any notes from your chosen tonality, your chosen scale, to represent any other chord. However, you might find that some work better than others, and that's purely up to you. The second is using chord scales and chord rotations to create new voicings. And the chord scales thing is very useful if you've not done it a huge amount before. It can be very illuminating. Obviously, like I say, for the more experienced of you out there, you probably didn't find that particularly useful. However, use rotations to at least turn each voicing into 3 or 4 new voicings, and then try those through chord scales or try them through various other methods. And then the third and final approach is experiment with stacking triads on top of each other, essentially. And there are so many chords that live in there. I'm sure there's a few that aren't quite in there, but you can see how vast that will be. If you found this one useful, please do give it a like, subscribe, ding that notification bell, and share with any of your friends who you think need some more chords. And as always, I hope you're all doing very well, getting plenty of practice in, and I very much look forward to seeing you in the next one. Cheers!
Roll up, let me embed a story you'll never forget. A drip, drip, but drowning in debt now. You can't buy your way out. And I heard you find it difficult to cope. Well, here by this bottle full of hope. And